How's this one? Hello, hello. Stop. Yep. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you made it. That's probably one of your first or early sessions. So my name is Piotrowski. I'm working as a solution architect and representing also the Tanzu Vanguard community, which is probably the best community on the planet. So if you would like to join it or know anything more about the community itself, you can ask myself, or there is a Tanzu Vanguard booth, so we can talk about that. But obviously, during this session, we are not going to talk about the community. I'm going to discuss how you can leverage Tanzu, especially Tanzu Mission Control, to hopefully make your life easier and save some time to maybe play some games or whatever you prefer. So I will focus on Tanzu Mission Control. That's pretty high level because we don't have so much time. It was planned to have some demos, but due to the time constraints, we are not able to do that. So just strictly to the point, why do we need such things like Tanzu Mission Control or Tanzu in general? So my roots and my background comes from the vSphere world, the VMware world, where we also do have the concept of clusters. But the vSphere cluster is slightly different beast than the Kubernetes cluster. In vSphere, we've got vCenter. We've got multiple clusters, maybe for production, maybe for tests, maybe pre-prod, QA, whatever. But in Kubernetes, we've got many more. So you might have a cluster for different type of environments. It's even very common to have a single cluster or multiple clusters for a single app. So according to the state of Kubernetes already in 2021, one of the thirds, like 40% of respondents said that they've got more than 50 or even more than 100 Kubernetes clusters. So this leads to a couple of challenges. How to get them, how to provision them, how to manage them, how to make them secure. So in Kubernetes, in a plain vanilla Kubernetes, we've got the management for a cluster, but not across clusters. This leads to lack of the central management. Lack of the central management leads to lack of standardization. This means it's going to be quite complex to provide the proper level of security, and that could lead to problems with compliance. So what we can do to fix it? We can use tools like Tanzu Mission Control especially, which provides the central control plane for your Kubernetes clusters. And doesn't matter whether those Kubernetes clusters are Tanzu clusters. Of course, there will be some advantages of that we will discuss in a moment. But technically, it doesn't have to be a Tanzu Kubernetes grid cluster. It could be any other Tanzu or any other Kubernetes cluster, conformant Kubernetes cluster, or any other third party that you can connect to Tanzu Mission Control and manage the same way or almost the same way as any other Tanzu Kubernetes grid clusters. But before we can actually do that, so we can see a couple of solutions. But as I said, it could be any conformant Kubernetes cluster. You are going to provide, the Tanzu Mission Control will provide almost the same capabilities for all of them. And the capabilities, I mean, is first of all, the policy management. So you can group your clusters together and apply policies that you can, that's especially for, I would say, this part of DevOps community, which is not super happy with writing some YAML files, because you can do it in a semi-graphical interface and then just apply to your clusters. There are a bunch of policies that we are going to discuss in a moment. The next point is the cluster lifecycle management. So with Tanzu Mission Control, you can not only apply policies, but you can also provision clusters, and you can manage, in terms of lifecycle management, those clusters. Here we can put a small asterisk, because this will apply mostly to Tanzu Kubernetes grid clusters. So this is the main difference between TKG clusters and Kubernetes conformant clusters. With Kubernetes conformant clusters, you will not be able to manage the lifecycle management as you do with TKG. But apart from that, the policy management, we've got the data protection. So Tanzu Mission Control comes with Velero, which is very easy to install and configure backups, again, from the graphical portal. There is an application catalog, which allows you in a very easy way to streamline the deployment of different packages across your Kubernetes clusters. So again, you don't have to know what kind of parameters are available for a particular package. The graphical interface will tell you what's possible and will give you an option to easily define that. So that's also going to be a significant advantage. But before we can actually use any of those capabilities that Tanzu Mission Control provides, we need to, first of all, get TMC, and we need to tell TMC about our clusters. And here, depending whether we've got Tanzu clusters or conformant clusters, this process will be a little bit different. So we will discuss, or we will differentiate the attached versus registered clusters. Registered clusters applies to, now we have to think about the correct name. So the supervisor clusters and Tanzu, basically Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, which currently I think it's called Infrastructure as a Service Control Plane, if you follow the naming convention changes, but that's the same product. And the only difference between those two is the lifecycle management. With Tanzu, we can also provision those clusters from the GUI, and that's, from my perspective, working with many customers and my colleagues, it's super useful because not everyone knows and is willing to search what kind of options we can define when we deploy a TKG cluster. And not everyone knows that we can choose Antria versus Calico. Not everyone knows what are the other options. If you do it from TMC, TMC actually will give you the wizard, which will guide you and will show you all the options which are available. I've just put a small asterisk next to EKS and AKS. Do you have any idea why we've got this asterisk? What's the difference? What's the caveat? So it looks like we can manage the lifecycle management for Tanzu, EKS, and AKS clusters, but not always. Anyone knows what will be? Scott. Exactly. So we didn't talk about that yet, but Tanzu Mission Control initially was a software as a service product available in the VMware's cloud. And that was the only option. Currently, or not currently, since already some time, we can deploy Tanzu Mission Control as a self-managed. So we can have it in an air-gapped environment, deploy it on premises, completely under our control. And that's why those two asterisks comes to the picture, because with the self-managed, obviously, or in most cases, when you deploy TMC as a self-managed, you do it for a reason. And that reason, in most cases, is an environment which is not connected to the internet, air-gapped environment. So in that case, probably you are not going to leverage Tanzu to manage your EKS or AKS anyway, but just in case, that's a small difference. All the other things, like especially applying policies, the management, deployment of packages, an easy way to configure data protection powered by Velero, that's applicable in both self-managed as well as software as a service option. When we talk about the management, with vSphere World, it's easy because we've got a single vCenter that manages multiple clusters. With Kubernetes, every Kubernetes cluster is an independent beast. But connecting them or registering to Tanzu Mission Control, we can handle them from one console, but we can also group those clusters together. It doesn't matter whether they come from the same source, so whether they are all Rancher or something else, or Tanzu clusters, or maybe they are in a public cloud, we can put them into a single group, like all my production clusters, all my test, dev, QA, however we are going to call them, in a single group, and later on to this group, we can apply the same set of policies. So that's quite useful. Another thing to group our objects is based on the namespace. So again, across multiple clusters, we can specify, I want this, 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 and that namespace to be a single group. And those groups are called workspaces in this case. And those policies that we are going to apply will be applied to namespaces, workspaces, clusters, or cluster groups. Again, doesn't matter what we put in it. Have anyone configured some network policies in a Kubernetes cluster? Did you like it? Yeah. Yeah. Is it complicated? Yeah, if you do it on daily basis, maybe it's not super complicated, but time-consuming, error-prone. So doing it manually in the YAML, I can find better things to do. So usually, when I was supposed to do some network policies, I was using some third-party graphical visualization like Cilium or some other stuff to simply specify what I need and just generate the YAML for me. With TNC, we don't need to use those third-party tools. TMC actually allows us to do that. Again, in a semi-graphical form, we can specify what traffic is allowed, what traffic should be blocked, preferably following the zero trust model. And that's going to not only generate a YAML file for us, just in case you want to see it, but it will create the policy that we can apply to our either a cluster or a cluster group, depending on your needs. Plus, for most of those policies that we've got in here, there are already prepared templates, like deny all, or probably you don't want to do that, but all or whatever. So in most cases, you don't need to start from scratch. You can just adopt what's already there. The next type of policies is the quota policies. So in most cases, again, we are not reinventing the wheel from scratch. We are just basically relying on the Kubernetes concept. We don't want to change the way you use or deploy the Kubernetes or use different packages. We just rely on the concept which is already there. So the second type of policies is the quota policy, which you can use and define what kind of resources will be aligned. So who's using quota policies? Is it common? Anyone? Yeah, in most cases, it's like resource pools in vSphere. I would prefer to avoid, but they are there. And if your organization or if your project, your applications needs them, or maybe you share a single Kubernetes cluster for different type of workloads, that might be useful. So we just define again, and this is part of the wizard where you can define the policy. There are predefined policies. You can specify what you want, what labels you want to apply, and just assign it to the cluster. Same with image registry policies, where you can specify what kind of image registries you want to allow in your organization. So a good example, maybe we've got some private registries. Maybe we've got only the approved ones. Maybe we've got Harbor running on premises, and I don't want my developers or whoever to go and use anything from the public registry. So that's quite a useful and common policy. Another very useful is a security policy. So nowadays, everyone is probably concerned about security. The cost of the security, it's always adding additional complexity. But here we want to reduce that complexity a little bit, or as much as possible, I would say. So the next type of policy that you can specify is the security policy. Again, this is part of the wizard. There are many other options. But in an easy way, you don't need to know how to define it in the YAML, how to define it, and when to apply this policy. You just specify whether you want to allow, for example, the privileged containers, or what kind of volume types you allow, whether you allow for the empty dir, maybe not. So again, you just define the policy and apply it to your clusters or workspaces where it should be applied. Another type of policies is the custom policy, which can be defined in the Rego language, which pretty much allows you to do anything you want. This is based on the Open Gatekeeper, so Open Policy Agent, that we are going to install as well and leverage. And here you can see the example I mentioned with the default templates. So there are a bunch of default templates. In most cases, instead of starting from scratch, unless you want to, I would just look around what's available, check maybe there is something which is satisfying my needs, maybe not, but maybe it's something that's at least close to what I need. Then obviously you can just adapt it. Plus, before you start developing any custom policies, I would recommend to check I think it's currently developer.vmware.com, where you can find lots of samples, because there is a high chance that someone already, let's say, developed what you potentially need. So again, you don't need to start from scratch. You can just use what's already there. And a very nice and useful thing, at least in my opinion, that's provided by Tanzu Mission Control, is the way to see whether we are compliant with those policies that we defined. So again, this is a Tanzu Mission Control portal. We've got the insight, and in this case, you can see all the type of policies with the red exclamation mark, which indicates whether there are any issues, any incompliances according to the policy that you defined. So if you specified some rules that were supposed to be enforced in a specific cluster or a specific namespace, and for some reason they are not because someone has changed it, then you will see it here in this wizard. Based on that, you can even maybe develop some CI/CD and automatic healing or anything like that. But the most important, at least for me, is that I can see it. I can see where we've got the violations, and that will ensure that I'm at least aware where I should make some corrections and maybe reapply the policy. Or maybe something has changed in terms of the requirements, so I should verify that. Another thing which is very close to those insights that we had in here, it's called inspections. So the inspection is like a kind of health check for your cluster. I haven't done it for Kubernetes, but I did it many times for the vSphere environments, running some kind of health checks for customers to verify whether their configuration, whether their clusters are compliant with best practices, whether they are appropriately configured. And that's what we've got in here. We've got 3 options for inspections: conformance, sysbenchmark, and light. Conformance will verify whether this is especially very useful for conformant clusters. Like maybe you deployed or installed the plain vanilla Kubernetes, you didn't use Tanzu, you didn't use any third-party solution. So you are not so sure whether this follows all the Kubernetes best practices. Running this health check or inspection, you will get an information with what's good, what's wrong, what maybe should be fixed, what's not necessarily following best practices. The sysbenchmark, that's obviously for security, and light is going to check your nodes configuration only. Yep. That's pre-configured. Yeah. So the inspections are pre-configured, at least as of now. Yeah. Another probably or hopefully important aspect of running Kubernetes, because very often, I think now it's not the case, but especially in the past at the beginning, I've seen it many times, that customers were moving to containerized applications, and they just believe that everything is all good. We don't need backup because we've got containers, they are stateless, but we still need some backup. Or we don't. We do, obviously. Do you use anything for Kubernetes backup? We can use Velero. And Velero allows, anyone has some water? All right. I will try to fix it. How to open it? Frank? How to open it?
Sorry, man.
Apologies. Thank you. Apologies. I think now it's better. As part of TFC, we've got an easy way to implement Velero, which you can just specify that you want to install as any other package in your cluster. Plus, from the central console, we can define those backups. So again, for people that are not familiar with YAMLs, with that low-level configuration, you can do it in the graphical form, just defining like any other backup, defining what you want to backup, where you want to fit. So obviously, TMC doesn't provide, it's not a backup solution. It allows us to manage Velero, but it's not a backup on its own. So obviously, we need a place to store those backups that must be at an S3 compatible storage. That could be pretty much anything. And once we've got it, we just define the backup jobs, the scheduler, where you want to store it. And obviously, in case we need it, we also have the option to restore, which shouldn't be forgotten. Plus, we can restore it not only to the same cluster, we can restore it also to another cluster. That might be useful to cover some initial parts of the disaster recovery scenarios. Apologies. So you can restore those workloads that you did the backup of into another cluster. You can also do some kind of replication and maybe treat it again as part of the initial disaster recovery solution. Yeah? Obviously, it's not going to be complete disaster recovery solution, but could be a good introduction. At least the starting point. And as mentioned before, initially, Tanzu Mission Control was meant to be a software as a service solution, but obviously there are lots of customers, lots of environments where we cannot use the software as a service, we cannot reach out to the cloud. So all the air-gapped environments, all the environments which for security reasons cannot be exposed and connected to any kind of cloud, now we've got the option to install Tanzu Mission Control. It's called self-managed. It's supposed to provide a feature parity with the software as a service version. However, it's not exactly the feature parity. One of the examples was related to the lifecycle management that we mentioned at the beginning. But there might be some other small differences and gaps. Tanzu Mission Control as a self-managed is released independently, kind of. You can find in the docs.vmware.com information about what's currently possible in release notes. And there is also a nice document. I've got just a screenshot of this one. So Tanzu Mission Control feature comparison, which unfortunately is not up to date yet, because you can see the essential version, which I believe doesn't exist anymore. But it's still a good entry point to show you what's possible in the self-managed, what's possible in the cloud. And if you want to find the most up-to-date information, you can check release notes on docs.vmware.com. So there will be eventually, I guess, the feature parity, but for now, there are still some small caveats and gaps when it comes to the self-managed. And when it comes to the self-managed, obviously, you are responsible for the deployment on your own. It's going to run on a Kubernetes, obviously, so there is no appliance. You have to prepare a Kubernetes cluster. The installation is pretty straightforward. You install it almost like any other package. And that's a high-level introduction to Tanzu Mission Control and Tanzu in general. Any questions? Yeah.
Resources for helping us get started with building our first policies.
I think nothing official, but there are lots of blogs which describes different examples how to build the policies. But on the other hand, defining the policy in Tanzu Mission Control is quite straightforward, even if you don't have any experience, any previous experience, because there is a wizard which tells you what's possible, what's not. Yeah.
So you've deployed 2 clusters so far, very, very beginning, and the container you want to deploy, we're using help, and it was being blocked by the default policy, and we just haven't really figured out how to be able to do this last thing. So that's why I'm asking about resources.
Okay.
So that instead of disabling it, which we had to do, I would like to better understand how do I actually configure the policy.
So I think in this case, of course, in documentation you can find what different options means, but that's not the real life scenario examples. So for those, I would rather look for some blogs. And there is I forgot the name, but there is a tech zone for Tanzu. I think Tanzu.techzone, and there might be some examples as well. So I would check that.
Kubernetes validating admission is the new thing coming on the Kubernetes flow. How we are thinking of adopting that?
Can we get this question in a moment? I will just release the audio. So if there are any other questions, I will be here. I will just release the audio for the next speaker, and we can talk about that. Thank you.